Hello everybody, welcome to this week's ISE webinar. My name is Marina and I will be facilitating today's webinar. I can see people joining, so in the meantime I'll explain some housekeeping rules. I'm joined today by Michele Trusolino, who is the co-founder and CEO at Debut, and ISE's Chief Research Officer Tristram Hooley, who will be presenting the results of the new research conducted by ISE and Debut. If you have any questions for either of our panelists, please leave them in the question box on the right-hand side, and I will feed them through at the end of this presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and you will get a link to the recorded version by the end of tomorrow, so you can revisit this session anytime you want and share it with your colleagues and peers. That's it from me. Over to you, Michele.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're very excited to have you here. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Michele Trusolino, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Debut. Now, to give you some background, Debut is an attraction and engagement platform dedicated specifically to early careers. And we started the business about 5 years ago. We did that because we believe in giving equal access to career opportunities to every student. And we saw that using technology, in our case, a mobile app, was really the fastest way to level the playing field and help both students and employers. And if you fast forward to today, Debut has over 200,000 students registered on our platform. The key, however, is not just the number of students, of candidates that we have, but really the rich data that we collect from each of our users. Over 60 data points are collected from every single student that onboards on our platform, ranging from their ethnicity or gender, their school and academic backgrounds, their preferences, their locations, language spoken, coding skills, and so forth. Now, this data is the core of our platform, and the reason why it's important is because it allows employers, every client of ours, to target specifically students that have, and graduates that have the right characteristics and interests directly on the mobile phone, effectively guaranteeing a much higher quality engagement. And our clients, employers, do that by sending a talent spot, which is this personalized message that is delivered directly into the pockets of every single student with those characteristics. Actually, this message is a text message inviting students to apply to a certain job or to attend a certain event. And we've recently introduced a video talent spot, so ability to make this message even better in video formats. And the result of this is that this creates a very personalized engagement with the students that employers want to target, which is something that we know this generation craves and values very much. And just as a data point, our talent spots have over 40% open rates, and during peak season, actually these numbers tend to even increase more, which makes it a very, very powerful tool. In addition, I think it's worth mentioning that our user base is very diverse. From every single point of view, we have a 50-50% gender split. Over 70% of our students actually have come from a social mobility background, and about 40 to 45% have a BAME background, which basically means that they do over-index compared to the UK higher education kind of representation of this demographic group, which is about 22%. Now, another unique point about Debut is something that stems from a decision that we've taken a few months ago, which was to open the platform to all the jobs available in the UK. Now, we've realized all the entry-level jobs, obviously. Now, we realized that the job market and this environment has suddenly become a lot more challenging for our students. And in order to help them as much as we can, we've decided to list every single jobs in the platform. There, we have today over 6,500 vacancies. And while this is incredibly useful for students because it gives them one place where they can find everything that is relevant to them and they can be recommended the right type of opportunities, I'm very pleased to say that we have witnessed a massive increase in engagement and traffic on our platform. So in the last month, our new user acquisition is up over 400% versus last summer, and traffic to our website is 3 times higher. What this means is that as the recruitment season now kickstarts, in Q4, we'll be able to have a much larger user base, which will allow us to deliver a lot more value to employers, and at the same time for them to receive a lot more focused applications from students that have all the right characteristics. Now, coming to this survey, now as part of our everyday work, we've actually become experts in understanding this generation. Actually, I should say generations, because when we started, we were talking about millennials, and now it's Gen Z, which is a bit different, and have their own particular characteristics. And this expertise obviously comes from the fact that we engage with the students every day, whether it is to market to them, to kind of get them on our platform, or whether it is to, on behalf of our clients, to propose and offer them various opportunities. And one of the tools we use to engage students is surveys, as it is the case here. The rationale behind the survey is that the last few months have presented all of us with an unprecedented situation that we all had to adjust to, from employers that had to digitize very, very rapidly all their summer internships or recruitment processes, to students that are today facing a much more challenging, much harder job market and environment. And we believe that in times like this is when people's perceptions and opinions shift. And so we thought it would be useful to run a survey to all our user base and really understand how their perception have changed, how they feel, what they fear, and so on. And we did that in collaboration with our friends at the ISE. So now, without further ado, I will pass it on to Tristram, who will take you through the methodology and the main findings of this research. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And that sets the scene really well for what we're doing. So I'm going to now just share the slides. Hopefully people can see that. So what I'm going to do is quickly run through the findings that we've got from this piece of research, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications for employers, and we can then take some questions at the end for both of us. So the report's going to be published this month. This is an advanced look at the findings. We think we're pretty much there with the findings, though. So we'll be making the report available both through Debut and through the ISE. So watch this space. Now, as Michele has explained, this is really dependent on Debut's network. Because Debut have got such great engagement with students, it was possible to get a very diverse range of students to participate in this research and to give us their insights. So I won't talk too much about this because we've covered this in previous webinars, but I think we need to recognise that we are in quite unprecedented moments. We've got some very serious economic problems in the country at the moment, which are likely to manifest particularly strongly for young people. And that, I think, provides the context for us going out to young people and asking them about their careers. Now, we're seeing stories like this coming up a lot, which is obviously creating worries for young people. If thousands of people are applying for entry-level, low-end jobs, then it's going to really, I think, scare a lot of young people. So this is the sort of context that we're looking at, I think. And when we then look at how the COVID situation is actually playing out across different sectors, we can see that it's very sectoral in nature. So while there's been a big downturn in jobs across all industries, that varies where we've got things like healthcare and education, so the public sector, for example, relatively unaffected by this, while areas like retail, catering and hospitality have seen a massive fall off in the number of jobs that are being posted at the moment. And obviously young people entering the labour market are picking up on this. So we did a survey, pulse survey in July with ISE members, and we can see that while ISE members are not reporting the same kind of drop-offs as overall as some other sectors, we can see that on balance, a substantial, around about half of ISE members are expecting to recruit less student entrants next year than they did this year. So that's quite worrying for a lot of young people. So the basic framing for this research was started with employers. So we went out to Debut's client list of employers and also to the ISE membership, and we said, what do you really want to know about what students are thinking? And so that's our basic question. And out of that, we then received 147 questions, ideas from students saying what it was that they were interested in looking at, from employers saying what they wanted to hear about. We then coded that, synthesized it together, and we ended up coming up with 7 big questions. So these are the 7 big questions that we asked. And as I get into them, you'll see that within that, there's quite a lot more detail. But we were asking employers, or employers wanted us to ask students these things. How are job seekers thinking about and planning for their career? What's important to them when they're choosing a job? What sources of information are they using and finding? How should employers communicate with them? What do they want to hear from employers? How do they feel about different assessment approaches that are in use, and how are they feeling about starting work? And I'm going to try and then give you essentially the answer to each of these questions. We asked students to rate it on a strongly disagree to strongly agree 4-point scale. And so one of the things I'm going to present you is various numbers. Where the number is 4, that means on average people are strongly agreeing. Where it's 1, they're strongly disagreeing. So the midpoint is 2.5. And I'm also going to look at where there was a substantial difference in the kinds of answers that were given between different groups. So generally the way I've done that is by looking at how many people were either agreeing or strongly agreeing with something. So what proportion of a particular group, so let's say white versus non-white students, what proportion of them were willing to agree with this statement as opposed to disagree with it? And where there's a big-ish difference, so more than 5 percentage points difference in that, I'm reporting that here. So obviously there are a lot of smaller differences that we're not getting into. So our questions were answered by over 2,000 job seekers. So it's a really strong sample that allows us to cut it down by different demographic features. And we know quite a bit, as Michaela is saying, about the gender, ethnicity, educational stages, whether they were state or privately educated, whether they were first in their family to attend university, and whether they'd attended a Russell Group university. So this is helpful stuff, and I've analysed the data looking at all of these different features. So let's dive into the questions. So the first question is, what are young job seekers thinking about and planning a career? So let's look at what they had to say about that. So overall, the answer is that young job seekers are pretty positive and proactive in their career planning, but they're quite concerned about the current employment climate. And I've got various quotes that I've scattered through the findings here, which came from the survey. So we've got people saying things like, a lot of students are worried about life after COVID, or be patient as class 2020 is going through it. So these young job seekers were concerned. So if we look at what they were actually saying, we can see where these bars are coloured blue, it's positive, and they're agreeing with these statements on balance. Where it's coloured pink or red, they're disagreeing with it. So in general, students were pretty positive. They were focused on their careers. They were willing to move to pursue their careers, both to the UK and outside. They felt pretty informed. They're considering further study in some cases. Some of them were saying that yes, their ideas had changed since the start of the COVID pandemic, but on balance, they weren't feeling confident that they would find a job that they want quickly after they leave education. So that's where we start to see some negatives from students. So I've tried to look at demographic differences, and there are some important ones here. So this issue about being focused on a particular career path was particularly strong in non-white, and actually Black British respondents were particularly strong in answering positively to that. They're more likely to be strongly focused on a career path than white respondents. And so also people who were non-Russell group educated were more likely to be strongly focused on a career path. So that was a difference there, and we think that might be because non-Russell group institutions tend to have a stronger vocational mix in their courses. Similar pattern when we looked at the issue of whether people were considering further study. So it's more likely to be non-white respondents to considering further study. Again, with Black British respondents most likely to be considering that route. But it was also true of privately educated respondents. And then finally, in terms of mobility, it's interesting because men, I think, were more willing to move to different places in the UK and out of the UK. And also our privately educated respondents and those with the family history of higher education were more willing to move out of the UK. And I'm going to talk a bit more at the end about what some of the implications are for employers. But what we can see is that how you're targeting your recruitment programs, what things you're trying to key into are going to be different depending on, or the way you do that is likely to shape the kinds of applicants that you get. And so, for example, if you want to talk about this being strongly focused on a career path, then you might interest people who are perhaps either the non-white respondents and the non-Russell group respondents. Finally, men were more confident about finding a job than women, quite a bit more confident actually, and privately educated respondents were feeling more confident than state educated respondents. And again, we see broadly the patterns that we see throughout this research are the ones that we would expect, where forms of advantage, whether that's associated with class, ethnicity, or gender, are tending to be reproduced in the data that we're seeing. Finally, women, I think, were more likely to have changed their ideas about their career than men following the COVID pandemic. And so that's perhaps suggesting that women, partly perhaps related to their confidence about their jobs, they're coming up with new ideas about what might be possible for them. So let's move on to our second question. What's important to students when they're choosing a job? Well, the answer is that students would ideally like organizations that provide them with the opportunity to have it all. And so that includes good career opportunities, good work-life balance, interesting work, decent pay, and the opportunity to work in an ethical organization. So if we look at those things, they're all positive. So they would like all of these things. But what's interesting here, I think, is that the most important thing is that they will be treated fairly by the organization. And the issue of pay, so we asked, is it important that you have above average salary? That's only appearing, relatively low down this list. Now, they would like it all. So this is the thing. So this gives you some useful tick lists about how to convey the things that you're trying to convey about your firm, why people might want to apply for it. But it also reminds us that money is not everything. Now, there are again some important demographic differences here. Non-white respondents were more likely than white respondents to say that above average salary was important to them. And a really interesting one is that those who were state schooled and who went to non-Russell group universities, so this might be seen as perhaps about vocational focus and also about class, they wanted to use what they've learned in education as part of their work. And so that's, I think, a really important message for employers, because we sometimes go out and say it doesn't matter what degree you've done, but some of our potential applicants really would like to be able to show you that it is important what degree they've done. Women also cared more about environmental policy, quite a lot more about environmental policy than men did, and wanted to work in an organization that was environmentally sustainable. So if we think beyond what was important to people about when they were choosing a job, and we start to think about what sources of information are they using, broadly, the answer is that they're using a combination of online and face-to-face sources, and they want to have access to both deep learning opportunities, so for example, placements, where they can really find out a lot about a firm, and also just-in-time kind of online information and things like that. So we look at these sources of information, generally they're saying all of these sources of information are helpful. So face-to-face work experience, jobs boards, and so on. There's not a really clear pattern here. So we looked, is there a pattern? The things that they really like are either face-to-face or online, or are they sort of more deep and extended opportunities or less deep and extended? And basically the answer is that they would quite like to have information, sort of sources of information that are a variety of different types. So all of these different things. When we then look at how they differ by their demographics, an unsurprising finding is that if you're looking for information from the Careers Service, it helps if you're at an institution. So if you're at a university, if you're not at a university, so if you're a recent graduate, you're probably finding it more difficult to access your Careers Service, so you're not going to find that so useful. So that's source of information, that channel to students is very helpful for those students who are still in education. There was some important differences around how useful they thought academic and teaching staff were. So this was stronger for non-Russell group respondents. Again, perhaps it's that vocational focus, but also men were more likely to turn to academics and teaching staff than women. And then women seemed a bit more likely to find online information useful than men did. So again, we can see the way that you organize your recruitment campaign, it's going to make a difference to the kind of students that you're likely to attract. So our fourth question was, how should employers communicate with them? So we're looking at actually specifically at channel here. And so the answer here is that they're actually open to a pretty wide range of forms of communication, but they're a bit skeptical about employers encroaching into more personal forms of social media. So if we look at this, we've got a fairly clear pattern here, where we've got more I suppose, business-focused forms of communication, email, LinkedIn, obviously through Debut itself, telephone calls, text messages being important, being things that students are keen on employers communicating with. And then you get to areas like blogs, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, where students start to express some concerns. Some of them are really not feeling that that's an appropriate way for employers to communicate. And there are some demographic differences again here. So telephone, a non-white and non-Russell group, male respondents more positive about the telephone, non-white and non-Russell group, students more positive about the use of text messages, a non-Russell group, respondents more positive about Instagram and Twitter, while white respondents more positive about Facebook. Again, this gets into quite a lot of detail that we perhaps won't dwell on, but what it really emphasizes again is the way in which you communicate your recruitment message, the campaign that you build is going to resonate with different types of respondents. And so all of these elements that you're putting together are actually shaping who's more likely to respond. What do they want to hear from employers? So what's the actual message they want to hear from employers? The answer really here is that they want a mix of information about how to succeed in the recruitment process and information about what it's like to actually work in that organization. So it's those two elements. And again, they want lots of information. They're very positive. The more information you can give them, they want to know what you're looking for. They want to know what opportunities are available in the firm. They want to know how to succeed in assessment centers, career pathways within the organization, all of these different things. And pretty much the more information you can give them about both recruitment and about the process of working within the organization, the better. Then we've got some demographic differences here. So there were some really interesting ones in this section. So one of the questions we asked was, would you like to hear from diverse employees so basically are from different backgrounds. And there was a really strong difference. So our non-white respondents and women were more likely to want to hear about the experience of employees from different backgrounds. So men, white respondents, they didn't see it was relevant to them to hear from diverse employees, but women and non-white respondents really wanted to hear about that. And those differences were actually cumulative. So if we look at female non-white respondents, almost all of them think it's important to hear from diverse employees, while only 71% of male white respondents feel that. So there's a really big difference. And so if you're going out and you're giving students opportunities to hear from current employees, it's really important to make sure that they're diverse, I think. Again, non-white respondents wanted to hear more about the social aspects of the organisation than their white counterparts. And they also, and so did women, want to hear more about corporate social responsibility, voluntary charity work, that sort of thing. And I think what's going on here is a really clear pattern where employees who perhaps have concerns about whether they fit in to particular organisations, perhaps they feel that those organisations are not, their people from their backgrounds are not well represented in those organisations. They really want reassurance. They want evidence that they will be able to fit into those organisations. So I think this is a really important finding that might have implications for people's recruitment strategies. Going on, we asked them about specific assessment approaches. Again, some pretty interesting findings here. So overall, they're broadly comfortable with all the main recruitment approaches that are in use and are mainly pretty happy to switch to online recruitment where necessary. So one of the big trends that's happening at the moment, that we're seeing in a lot of data we're doing with employers at the moment, is that there is a trend towards switching recruitment online to manage the current COVID outbreak. So our respondents, yes, they would probably prefer on balance to do a face-to-face interview or a face-to-face assessment centre, but they're not that bothered. They're pretty positive about all of these things. They can handle all of these things. Now, psychometric testing is the least popular, and we're going to get into that a bit more because there's some really interesting demographic findings there. We also asked a question about whether young job seekers overall, whether they trusted employers to treat them fairly. And, you know, a good chunk of them really do trust employers to treat them fairly. But you end up with something like 30% or something like a third of students don't trust employers to treat them fairly. And again, that's a slightly concerning finding, and one which gets more concerning when we look at some of the demographic breakdowns. So let's look at these demographic differences. White respondents are more comfortable with online interviews and online assessment. Female respondents, again, more comfortable with online assessment centres. But the psychometrics was a really interesting one because white, male and privately educated respondents were more comfortable with psychometric testing than their counterparts. And these were, again, to some extent cumulative, meaning that if you're white, male and privately educated, 83% of you are going to say, yeah, I feel pretty comfortable taking a psychometric test. Whereas if you're non-white, female and state educated, only 64% of you are likely to say, actually, yeah, I feel pretty comfortable taking a psychometric test. Now that's quite worrying because psychometric tests are very well used, and the fact that people have different levels of confidence and feel differently about these psychometrics is something that I think employers want to think about. Now, this is not saying that psychometrics are not fair. Many employers introduce psychometrics to try and actually eliminate bias. The important thing here is the perception amongst students is I think, really interesting here. And then fair treatment. White respondents and those who attended non-Russell Group institutions were more likely to agree that employers will treat them fairly. And I think it's probably fairly expected that white respondents would say that they would be more likely to say that they were going to be treated fairly. There were important differences. I think when we dig further into the ethnicity, so only 65% of Black and Black British respondents are saying, yes, I feel comfortable that I'm going to be treated fairly. And other non-white ethnicities, it's a kind of catch-all for a number of people who didn't fit into one of the categories. Only about half of those felt they were going to be treated fairly. So there's something important going on with ethnicity here and people's likelihood to report that they're treated fairly. But there's also something interesting going on here with Russell Group and non-Russell Group institutions. And one thing that I think is worthy of note is that the non-Russell Group institutions, some of the differences that come out across this study are quite big between Russell Group and non-Russell Group. And it may be that there are some big differences between how we should be communicating to people who are at those elite institutions as opposed to the rest of the student population. Finally, how are they feeling about starting work? There weren't really big demographic differences here. So overall, people were pretty positive. They're excited to start work, and they're also pretty happy to start work virtually by working from home if necessary. That's, I think, probably pretty good news for employers who are currently in the process of inducting students online. So I think to draw out some implications for employers, these are some thoughts that I have. So the first thing I think is that careers matter. Many employers are valuing lots of the things around careers. They're strongly focused on career paths. They're looking for job opportunities that give them career development and so on. So careers, focusing on this idea of careers is really important. And recognizing that while money is important, it will make a difference. Money isn't everything in attracting people. Students are looking for a more rounded sort of bag of different attributes from a job than just money. Next thing is that you need to really be telling everyone, students aren't just using one information source. They're not just going to their careers service. They're not just going to academics. They're not just looking online. They're doing all of these things to a greater or lesser extent. So you need, I think, a recruitment strategy which is diverse and looks out and uses multiple channels. But you want to be careful about encroaching on job seekers' non-work social media. That's not to say that there is no case in which you should put things on social media. It's important to remember that people here are not saying we haven't got data on what people actually respond to. We've got data on what people like and feel comfortable with. And so it may well be that students will tell us that they don't want to see job adverts on Instagram, but when they see one, they respond to it. But I think what is clear from this message is students are sending us a really strong signal that they don't want employers to just be kind of encroaching on their private spaces. And so we need to be careful about how we do that. I think another thing is that making a meaningful connection with job seekers is really important. It's not just about sending them a bit of information about salary. They want to know a lot about the firm. Some of them want some reassurance about whether they're going to fit into that firm. They want to hear from current employees and that sort of thing. So a meaningful connection is really important. There needs to be a shift to online recruitment approaches. You're fine to do that. It's not to say that students won't respond or don't like other forms of recruitment approach, but given the current situation, they'll cope with that. They're positive about it. I think it's important to be fair and to be seen to be fair. And this issue of fairness comes up in a number of the questions that we asked. And finally, I think the job seekers, just as they're comfortable with the online recruitment approach, they're also comfortable with virtual induction and home working if they need to be. But there were a lot of diversity issues that emerged, and I think here are some things for you to think about as you strategize your recruitment for next year or the year after. First is just the basic point that thinking about how you communicate with candidates, picking channels which are likely to attract the kinds of students that you want is going to be important, and recognizing that the patterns of use of different channels and different forms of information are different between different students. And I think we can dig more into that, but essentially there are some clear patterns here about what people like and don't like to use. I think give candidates the opportunity to see how they will fit in, and obviously make sure that those opportunities are positive. So more diverse candidates are likely to have concerns about fitting in. They want to hear from people like them. They want to see how they might fit into the organization, and give them those opportunities to see that. Be clear and positive about your organization's environmental policies. It's something that a lot of students care about, but particularly female students seem to care about more. Be careful about how you talk about psychometric assessments. I think there's a lot more thinking to do here, but there are some real issues that this research reveals in the way people perceive what psychometric assessments are and what they're for. I think another thing is the importance of recognizing what students have achieved in education, not just dismissing what people have achieved, not dismissing their subjects, but actually valuing that. And that, again, was more important to diverse students. And then finally, and this is more difficult perhaps, but don't assume that students are geographically mobile. There were really important differences in students' willingness and interest in moving across the country and across the world by some demographic factors, particularly gender actually was important there. So in summary, our answers, I think, are that young job seekers are positive and proactive in their career planning, but they're concerned about the current employment climate. They would like organisations to provide them with the opportunity to have it all in terms of what might attract them. They're using a range of different information sources, and they're open to a range of communication, but they're sceptical about this encroaching on personal social media. They want to hear from employers. They want a range of different information about both recruitment and about working in your organisation. They're comfortable with most of the main recruitment approaches and happy to switch to online. And they're positive about starting work and happy to participate in virtual inductions and home working. But there's some important variations by demographics that you should be mindful of. So I'm going to finish there. I hope some of that was of interest. I think it's really interesting to hear from different people about about whether this chimes with you, and to also answer some questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tristram and Michele. As Tristram mentioned, we have some time for your questions, so type them away in the question box, which should appear on the right-hand side in the software panel. If you missed the beginning of the webinar, the session is being recorded, and we will send you a link to the recording so you will have a chance to rewatch the session. During the lockdown, we made all our webinars available to everybody, so you can watch our previous webinars on our YouTube channel, and I can leave a link in the chat box for you. So if anyone would like to rewatch any of our previous webinars, the link should appear in the chat box now. And I suppose we'll give a couple more minutes, see if we got any questions.
I mean, it might be worth, hearing about because Michele, you're interacting with students a lot more regularly than, I mean, at the ISE we tend to talk to employers a lot. I mean, do these findings kind of chime with you? Is there anything that kind of stuck out to you that you thought was particularly interesting?
Yeah, I think that some of the details are very interesting, but the underlying theory, which is something that at Debut we have been talking to clients already now for quite some time, is that in this day and age, the message that is delivered to your audience, to students, needs to be as customized and as customizable as possible. The time of treating everybody in the same way and delivering the same message to everybody, I think it's over. And thanks to platforms like ours, the very specific forms of communications that now exist, we need to be able to deliver a targeted message to a specific group of students that will find that information more relevant, and not have these kind of broad brush messages that ultimately will just not generate the engagements that you need. So I mean, we've seen here, for instance, that female students tend to be more interested in CSR. So make sure that as part of your attraction strategy, if it is one of the priorities to engage more female candidates, is to make sure that a certain message around your CSR and maybe the values of your organization is delivered specifically to the students, because those are the ones that wants to hear about it. And so, go down a level in terms of being very specific with very specific audiences and how you communicate with them and what you communicate to them.
Makes sense.
Thank you. We had a few questions. Yes, we had a few questions from the audience. And the first question is from Jennifer. What are students doing to make them more employable beyond their technical degree?
I mean, so this was really a question, a survey that we were asking, where we were asking students about their perceptions of the process of recruitment, rather than about their kind of wider activities. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of work that's written elsewhere about what students can do in order to enhance their employability. I think one of the things that will be very interesting over the next few months is students who don't immediately walk into a job, because it is a very challenging environment, that if they're not walking into a job, how are they going to spend their time? And I think that probably will be an important thing for people to think about. And also, where are they going to get support from? Because one of the findings we had was that students who weren't in education were much less likely to be able to use their careers services, for example.
And one thing that we've done here is, most of the audience to this webinar are recruitment managers or employers. And I think as much as Debut, it is also like, it's our common responsibility to help and assist these students in this really hard moment as much as we can. So, providing advice to this audience as to what they should do how to improve their employability, what to do if they can't find immediately a job. I think it is almost our shared responsibility to make sure that we do help and support. Obviously, universities on one hand already do that job, the career services already do that job, but as employers or as market participants, I think it's something that we should all kind of chip in, if you like, and kind of try to help them as much as we can, because it will be a very hard time for every young person out there.
Thank you. Alice is asking, are there any online assessment methods you would recommend that would appeal to a diverse range of job seekers?
So online assessment was, I mean, people were fairly positive about it. In fact, women seem to be a little bit more positive about it than others. I think what we're seeing is that employers are moving towards an increased amount of online assessment. At the moment, most of that is really about the transfer of existing face-to-face approaches online. I mean, I think one of the things that will be exciting to watch in recruitment over the next year or so is the growth of new forms of assessment. So at the moment, people are still saying, well, okay, we used to do an assessment center, let's do it online. We used to do an interview, let's do it online. Obviously, the online environment will open up new opportunities, and people should really be asking these questions about how different groups in terms of diversity are doing within those assessments and how they feel about them. I think that's really important for people to look at. One
thing around the broader topic of online assessment, and as Debut, we are, it's a bit specific, but we are partnering with the company that runs 2-week-long challenges, coding challenges for computer science students, to basically help the students showcase their abilities, their skills to potential employers. And it is a relatively, we're partnering with a company that is doing these webinars, including these hackathons, if you like, these challenges. And it's a new way for companies to gain some understanding on the skills of students without necessarily having to have them in the office for an interview or an extended interview. And I think that this is one of the things we were very excited about this opportunity, but I think it's only one of the many new platforms and tools that will come online in the next in the next few months to be able to effectively substitute the face-to-face interactions that has been common since this year.
The next question is from Miguel. What sort of content students and graduates are looking for when visiting a company's career website?
I mean, it's not sure if I have a specific answer, but as it came out from this survey, I think there are quite a lot of information that students want to have, and it does change depending on who the student is. We know, and the survey confirmed it as well, that especially if you belong to a certain demographic group, you want to find more things that point towards the inclusiveness or how inclusion is important for that organization, because they want to be able to recognize that is a work environment where they would be appreciated and where they would not be excluded, basically. So very important. I would say for everybody, almost everything is important, but certain specific elements tend to be more relevant for certain specific categories of students. I know it's a bit of a generic answer, but it's again, probably what we learned here is that the more specific, the better. The better for everybody. I don't know if Tristram, if you have anything to.
Yeah, I mean, the basic things that students are looking for, they want to know about how does your recruitment process work, and they want to know what's it like to work for you. Now, whether they can satisfy both of those fully from your website, probably not, but they definitely will want information on those two things amongst others. I mean, they will then want more, as you say, more specific information tailored to them, the opportunity to ask questions, that kind of thing. But the website should certainly cover that, I think.
And
thank you.
Sorry, if I can just add another small point. Around maybe it's more about job descriptions and less around the websites, but there are platforms out there that helps employer to make, for instance, gender neutral job descriptions. Very often we don't even realize we might use certain words that might have a different appeal to different genders, for instance. And so I would definitely recommend to every employer to use those platforms and make sure that whatever they put out there has a language that does not end up being appealing or being more discouraging for a certain group of students, because that's all part of the kind of the strive to diversity. And sometimes there are some small biases that we don't even realize we have, but that end up having an impact in the person that reads the job ad, for instance.
Great, thank you. How do you think the Kickstart program will be received by students? Is there a danger that there will only be available to non-uni graduates?
So Kickstart, well, there have been various problems in getting Kickstart up and running from what I was reading this morning. So at the moment, the main problem people are going to have is it doesn't really exist yet. But yeah, I mean, it is technically going to be open to graduates if they're under, I think, the age of 25. But it will be, you have to have been unemployed for 6 months. So it's not really designed with graduates in mind. So I think it'll be interesting to see, but I suspect it won't be particularly highly used by graduates. We'll have to see. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit kind of still a theoretical thing at the moment.
Yeah, last week there gave a small interview with the Guardian for an article, and I think, you know, my point there was that the lack of clarity that has surrounded this whole program at the beginning certainly does not help and does not create a lot of trust into what benefits that of this program will be. I think we need to have a bit more understanding as to what exactly how it will work and when companies will be able to kind of kickstart it, to start doing that. I think before being able to really assess what the you know, the real impact will be.
Thank you. Andrew is wondering if employers will change their practices as a result of the survey.
Of course, I mean, you know, everybody sits listening to what we have to say, don't they? And I mean, I don't think you should. I don't think it's good practice for people to change their kind of whole overall recruitment approach based on one survey. I think this raises a number of important questions. It also probably will reinforce a number of things that employers are already doing. But yeah, I would certainly think if you're in a process of doing some reviewing of your recruitment program for graduates in particular, but for student hires in general, then I think there's definitely useful data in here that you should consider as part of that process of reworking it. And I think there's some really important things about social media strategy here that you might want to think about. I think there's some really important things about how you convey your overall offer, and then there's some very important stuff here about the dangers of ignoring demographic differences and just you know, marketing in the same way to everyone. I think these are some things that people should definitely consider.
Thank you. Have you noticed any shift from a more structured application processes to a more speculative approach among students?
It's a bit early for that. Yeah, I mean, I think by the time COVID hit, most of last year's recruitment cycle, the kind of application stage of it was pretty much done. I mean, not completely. I think we'll be starting to see that soon. So we're about to launch a new survey with employers where we're going to be asking about how things are going, you know, in terms of this year as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very likely that the number of applicants for jobs is going to increase. I mean, the number of jobs has been going down. I think most employers are braced for a, you know, a big increase in the number of applicants they get for each vacancy they've got.
From like some anecdotal evidence that we gathered by talking to some of our clients is that for companies that had vacancies open even through COVID, through the lockdown in the last couple of months, they have seen much faster acceptance rates of offers and a much lower renege rate. So students tend to effectively, when offered a job, tend to accept a lot faster and then tend to stick to it. While in the past, you know, students might still, you know, be out there hedging their bets and trying to maybe still have interviews with other companies at the same time. So I think this kind of definitely shows that, you know, students are very aware of the challenges in the market, and, you know, they are more, you know, in a way, if I can say, more likely to value a job offer that they receive, you know, more than maybe they did the year before, where they thought they had more opportunities elsewhere. So, you know, definitely. And another element, while I don't know about speculative applications, I can say that we have seen a lot of that volume and engagement on our app, with a lot of students spending time on the app, going through jobs, applying to jobs. And this is, again, it's obviously part of the fact that we now have all the jobs there, and so we can attract a lot more traffic, but I think it's also a reflection of how students feel in this moment and the fact that they're actually probably putting more effort into their job hunting process.
Perfect, thank you. Are university institutions setting more updated expectations of the current employment market to their students?
Again, it's a bit early to say. I mean, career services have been, struggling, as everyone has, to operate through the lockdown. They have mostly carried on delivering services. I think the problem that we've all got, both employers and career services, and in fact job seekers as well, is that the labour market picture is very dynamic at the moment. It's not clear what's going to happen. I mean, there've been some, although I think overall I've been fairly gloomy in a lot of the predictions I've made about how the labour market is going, there've been some quite positive signs over the summer, and it's not absolutely clear where we're all going to wind up. So I think what we would hope would be happening is that the career services would be continuing to watch the labour market very closely and being a conduit for that information to students and helping students to listen to what the labour market is telling them and respond to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing that, as talking to employers, let's try not to just rely on career services of universities to deliver that message. I think that, again, we all have a shared responsibility to make sure that we help students as much as possible, even to knowing what's going on and what's happening, and what's available to them and what's not available to them in this moment.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Mark is asking, what do you feel are the danger signs for students when they are assessing the authenticity of a recruitment campaign?
Sorry, Tristram, go ahead.
Probably more of your expertise than mine.
One thing that we keep hearing, and when we had students every week, we had several students in our company to do product interviews, and we do very often talk about how the approaches that companies use, and they absolutely do not engage with corporate, the typical corporate content, corporate videos, and things that are not seen as real, as raw, as authentic. This is a generation, I mentioned in the beginning, like there's a little bit of a difference between millennials and what Gen Z today is. If you think about someone that is at university today, they grow up in the world of social media, they grow up in the world of user-generated content, and what they really appreciate is content that is seen as authentic. And unfortunately, a lot of, let's say, large companies, they tend to produce content that they put out there on the social media platforms that tend to be a bit too polished for the audience. So one of the reasons why we introduced the video talent spots within our platform is to give the opportunity to a recruiter to film a very quick 30 seconds video that is done by the person, very authentic, and that really speaks to the students in the language that they're used to see online and to communicate among themselves, through. And so I would, my advice would be to try to be as real as possible with your messaging, and while still talk about what your values are and everything. At least in that engagement, try to have a little bit of this personal approach and try to be, try to be authentic, because they see through it. They absolutely see through it, and they do not engage with that content. Also, one thing around the diversity, this probably goes without saying, but if you are trying to engage a certain type of audience, you need to use people that belong to that demographic group. And maybe this is a personal anecdote, but I was talking to someone that was saying, you know, was the owner of a PR company, and he's a person for Black Heritage, and he said, when I see a car advertising with the happy white family in the car, it does not appeal to me. I don't feel that I want to go and explore whether the car is an option for me, because I don't see it relating to me. And, you know, imagine when you're trying to engage someone that is 18, that feeling is even more true. So make sure that your message is authentic and is very targeted to who you want to engage. I don't know, Tristram, if you have anything to add there.
I mean, I'd really agree, and I think the data that we have tells us that people really value actually hearing from employees rather than just hearing corporate messages, and so I think that's absolutely right.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michele and Tristram, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. Keep an eye out for the link to the recording and follow Debut and ISE to be the first to get the report. Final thank you, and hope you have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.